This is Jake Steak Roberts. You listen to WGD Wrestling Weekly, man, with Steve and The Scum.
Hey, everybody. Thanks once again for joining us right here at WGD Weekly with Steve and The Scum. My name is Steve. With me, as always, is the beacon of truth and virtue and the American way, and that is The Scum. We got one hell of a show tonight. We got Larry Zbyszko, the living legend. Larry Zbyszko joins us here momentarily, but first we wanted to get into some recent subject matter. It looks as though, Scum, we lost, in sense of retirement, we lost one of the best announcers ever, and that's good old JR.
Yeah, sorry to hear that. I mean, I know you're a big fan. I'm also a big fan, Steve. Jim Ross will always be fondly remembered by both Steve, the Scum, and fans all around the world for his unique brand of calling the action. Always kind of called it a lot like a sportscaster, you know, giving you the history, giving you the backline, the family, the athletic background of everybody, kind of an era, the last of an era gone by, Steve.
Oh, you know it, man. And again now, you're looking at a guy that has seen it all, done it all, been there, done that. He was the voice of WWE throughout the Attitude Era, something that you're never going to forget. All those crazy calls, of course, that memorable Hell in a Cell match with Undertaker and Mankind. If you're even a casual wrestling fan, you'll know what I'm talking about. So we really, really will miss him behind the mic. But again now, Scum, we got another guy that made his mark in the ring, but at the end of his career certainly was someone that we can all recognize behind the microphone on Monday Nitro throughout the Monday Night Wars, and that's a living legend, Larry Zbyszko.
Sure. Really excited to have Larry on here. Like I always say, it's always a pleasure here to be on the program with my longtime tag team partner. That's you, Steve. Always a pleasure to be with the boys over at Wrestling Glory Day, but it is an extreme pleasure to be with the living legend of professional wrestling tonight, Larry Zbyszko. Can't wait to get into this. God knows what he's got to say. I mean, years and years and decades of memories. From Bruno to Russo, Larry Zbyszko. He spans quite a few eras.
You're a regular poet laureate over there, Scum, I'll tell you what. But you're absolutely right, and as we say it here, the phone lines are lit up now. We got Larry Zbyszko with us, so let's go right to it, shall we?
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay, folks, with us now, we have a man that needs no introduction, a man that has held titles and accolades too numerous to mention. I do want to mention the time that he destroyed a title, however, but not right now. We'll get to that very soon. It's time to take a trip to Larryland, folks. Let's say hello to the living legend, Larry Zbyszko. Thanks for being with us today, Larry. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Nice to still be living. Beats working. How you guys doing?
We're well. We are working.
Good. That's right. Doing good. Doing good.
We do really appreciate it, Larry. Well, let's get right down to business. As wrestling lore would have it, we'll get into more of that throughout this course of the interview, but you were trained in a storyline, at least, by the legendary Bruno Sammartino. So just to set the record straight, did you actually train under Bruno, or was that a storyline? And if not, who did you actually train under prior to your debut in 1973? And if it was Bruno, how did that relationship come about? And either way, take us through your memories of training and getting into the wrestling business.
Well, you know, it's an interesting story. It's a true story. And, you know, back then in those days, late 60s, early 70s, there was no such thing as a storyline. And it was a very closed shop. Professional wrestling was like a secret Illuminati group that did not want you in the business. They wanted you sitting in the, you know, in a chair holding a ticket stub. You know, back in those days, there was no big companies. If you didn't draw, you know, people into the seats, you know, guys didn't eat. Very closed shop. In fact, if guys would come around pestering a promoter too much, he'd finally put you in a ring with somebody and they'd break your arm or something and send you back to the neighborhood. And that's how they get rid of you. But true story about Bruno. You know, when I was a kid, I moved to Pittsburgh from Chicago when I was like 12 years old. First time I ever saw pro wrestling was in Pittsburgh. And Bruno was probably at the, you know, height of his career back then. Really impressive, you know, 280 pounds. It was like a gorilla and throwing the bad guys all over the place. And, you know, now you got a kid that was raised in the 50s, you know, off the Lone Ranger and Roy Rogers. And, you know, where a good guy was a good guy. And I just, you know, fell in love with pro wrestling. When I was 12, I knew what I wanted to do. That was it. There was no other choice. It was like a destiny. And I started wrestling in Pennsylvania, it was one of the few states that had like an early, amateur wrestling program in grade school. I started wrestling in 8th grade, because I wanted to be a pro. Then I took martial arts. Then I took jiu-jitsu. I did everything, to college, to become a pro wrestler. And then I was actually probably maybe in my senior year, and I was kind of late, like most people were 17, I just turned 16. But I started driving a car, and I found out where Bruno lived. He lived like 2 miles down the road from where my house. And every time I start driving, whenever I would go that direction, I'd go 1 block out of the way and drive past Bruno's house to see if I saw him. He was my hero. And one day I'm going by, and he had these hedges around his backyard. I'm going down the street, and through the hedges I could, barely see him. He was standing out in the back by his pool getting a suntan. And when you got to be kidding, I couldn't help it. I stopped the car, and I crawled through this guy's hedges, like a thief. He's watching this kid, crawling through his hedges, emerging into his backyard, and that's how I met him. And he kind of was impressed by the amateur, record, and I was very respectful. And in a time when it was really rare, he, took me under his wing, and I started working out with him. Actually, in his basement, he had a gym set up, which in those days was just a bench, an incline bar, and some big dumbbells. But I started doing his workout, which is a lot of chest and heavy chest, and that's why I kind of resembled him, when I started, because I've been doing his workout. And in fact, when I started, I weighed about 245, and I bench pressed 465 pounds, and I was pretty proud of that. For being 245, and that was, in the days when men were men for real. And but that's how the history kind of went, and that's the truth. I met him by crawling into his backyard, and he did take me under his wing and taught me some stuff. And it was also kind of a combination of things, because Bruno was such a big star, and I'm a young guy. I get in the business. It was hard to get into WWWF. That was the premier territory. But, Bruno makes a phone call, and I'm in there as his protege. And then all the guys, that it was a tradition not to tell anybody anything, because they didn't want anybody to know the Illuminati secrets, because it would take their job away. So it was a very close shop. But all the guys, some Strongbows and Albanos and Monsoons and Skolins and guys you've never even heard of that were, top pros and great workers and tough wrestlers. They all took me under their wing and taught me what they knew, because it was like brownie points politically because of Bruno, which I didn't even realize at the time. I was just having a great old time. But that's the story of how I got involved. It was just a destiny. You have a dream, you believe in it, and crawl through someone's hedges, and it came true.
That is incredible. Being able to find opportunity when it was knocking, or make opportunity knock for you, is incredible. And heck, what a person to train under in the peak of his career. And you don't want to use any analogies, but there's probably a couple of names that you could think of that maybe somebody had that privy as they were going up through the business maybe in the 80s, but that's something pretty incredible. And, you say a lot about everybody that gave you all the advice and everything. You wind up Rookie of the Year in Pro Wrestling Illustrated in 1974, and you mentioned going straight to the WWF. If I did my homework correctly, you spent a little bit of time in Pittsburgh and even up in Western Canada. And I know that you eventually landed the WWWF and won the tag titles with Tony Garea. Talk us about facing some of these guys and working with Tony Garea or villains like Bugsy McGraw or Abdullah or Superstar Billy Graham.
Well, you know what? It was, it was thrilling. And like I said, I got kind of a lucky break and was involved in a lot of upper-level things because of the Bruno protege publicity. But what he did first was, I was a very good amateur wrestler and had backgrounds and other things. But what he did was, before he brought me in as his protege, he had, I did a few shows around Pittsburgh because in those days Bruno owned that little Pittsburgh territory. And I'd started in little high school shows on the weekend, kind of kept you under the radar. But that's how you learned back then. There was no schools. They didn't want you in the business. They never, there's a school every 50 feet nowadays, and no one knows what the hell to teach. So back then it was, different. But so he said that he sent me across to Vancouver, where I was working with Gene Kaninsky to get a little experience and get a little polish. So then maybe about 5, 6, 7 months or so after that, I came back and then got the push in the WWWF as his protege. But I had a little of experience, so, I wouldn't make him look bad. But back then, too, I mean, I was, dealing with, the top names. When I was 25, 26 years old, I was already in the ring with Killer Kowalski's and Billy Graham's and Fuji and Tanaka's and, all kinds of characters. I mean, wild and crazy characters in a world that was a lot different than it is today. I mean, it was an exciting time. I feel bad this generation's never going to know the freedoms and the way it was back then. I mean, it was a thrill. I mean, and it was all pure energy. I mean, when you walked out, there was no music, there was no fireworks, there was no strobe lights. You walked out, but the place would go nuts. I mean, Madison Square Garden would be shaking with pure, energy of people booing or yaying, and it was a trip with these guys. And again, I kind of learned from a generation before me at a very young age when most guys didn't have that opportunity. So I got kind of a unique knowledge. I guess I'm like Larry One Kenobi now, or Yoda.
As long as there's a student that's willing to listen, I guess.
Well, there's a bunch of them willing to listen. The tough place today is there's nowhere to go. I mean, in the WWE over the years, and I mean, I was amazed. I'm still like in awe because when I left there in 1981 and never came back until I was at the WrestleMania weekend, the one they had at Giant Stadium and Bruno in the Hall of Fame and all that, and I was invited there. And I mean, to see what, wrestling became from, the 1970s when I was in it was basically still the carnival. But to see, how huge, it was bigger than the Super Bowl. I mean, it was amazing how huge it got, and people tailgating, and we're leaving the hotel in like 10 big black SUVs, and there's 20 state troopers going down the New Jersey Turnpike at rush hour with their sirens blaring, and the traffic, with this rush hour cram, is pulling over, and these black vans are coming through, and you'd swear it was Obama or some stupid king or something. It's just the boys, just the wrestlers coming through, a bunch of wacky, wonderful guys who are in outer space. It was amazing.
That's incredible stuff. I had a quick question I wanted to ask, and I'm going to tag in my partner here for a couple of questions. But you said you worked in Pittsburgh in that territory. Now, was that at the same time that you said the Mongols were there, Bill Eadie, George Steele? Did he come through that territory with you as well?
Well, yeah. Well, George, popped in and out. George was one of the guys that was a headliner for a while in the WWWF, and all the guys that went through the WWF would wind up doing a shot in Pittsburgh, because Bruno owned that area for a while. But then the Mongols, Guido and Beppo, Guido bought the little Pittsburgh territory from Bruno. So Guido was actually running the little Pittsburgh area for a while. And it was funny. I remember me and Bill Eadie used to meet up sometimes in Guido's barn. He had a ring set up, and me and Bill would go over wrestling moves and stuff. right before, right before we kind of started. We were doing the little shows, and then I never saw Bill for like 25 years through my whole career. He was always in some place. It was always someplace different. It was funny.
That's incredible. He's one of my favorite guys of all time. Any persona, always loved Bill Eadie's work, along with yourself. And one last question before I tag in the Scum here. What was it like? You had mentioned never working in the World Wrestling Federation or WWE, of course, but you spent some time there early. What was it like working under Vince McMahon Sr.?
Well, Vince McMahon Sr. was a classic old school promoters. Again, you're talking about a different world. If you watch a movie from the 30s or 40s and see these characters in the back of an arena, it's kind of how they were. And they had a whole different structure. And like I said, they're still in the carnival where it was Vince McMahon Sr., but then he had a partner named Phil Zacco and another partner named Willie Gilzenberg, and at the beginning, and they were very smooth customers. I remember Vince Sr. always had a good look. He had that wavy, gray hair going back. Always wore like a light brown kind of, what the hell is it? Camel skin or some kind of fancy jacket, long jacket, and he'd have 4 or 5 quarters in his hand, and he'd be jingling. A very soft-spoken guy. But they were very serious about business. It was a different kind of structure. So back in those days, your word was your contract. There was no contracts. Your word was your contract. The 2-week notice was standard operating procedure, and it was a completely different world too. And I mean, back in those days, guys like me, top guys, some other guys. I mean, you'd go to these shows, these little shows in the middle of nowhere, and, some high school that's got 1,500, 2,000 people packed in the place, and you're driving around during the week hitting a few of these, and by the end of the week you're driving home and you got $10,000, $15,000 in cash in your trunk, from all the shows during the week, and, there was no commissions in some of these places. So it was a whole different world. It was kind of like the carnival. We came to town and we drove out with cash and never to be seen again until next month. Now it's completely different now.
Yeah, sure.
Which was kind of like, I think one of the things that lead to some of the down periods where wrestling gets a little stale, because back then we had to really be into the love of wrestling, into the love of the business. Because, again, if you didn't draw money and sell tickets, you didn't eat. Then we went through a wave of an era where the companies were big enough to give guys contracts, whether they drew money or not. And some of these clowns didn't really love the business and didn't care if they drew money. They were under contract. They didn't care. So I think, for a while there, some of the ability of the talent, just kind of went down the gutter because they kind of lost that love of the business, and the Illuminati clammed up and wouldn't tell them anything.
Sure. That would make sense, and it would also speak to the quality of the product back then, comparatively, I would say, too. So anyway, moving along, while you were still with WWWF, obviously the big program that everyone knows about was when you worked with your mentor, Bruno Sammartino. You needed to step out of his shadow, let's say. You turn on and attack him, and immediately makes you one of the most hated men in wrestling. First, if you could, walk us through how the program was brought about for you to feud with Bruno, and what was it like feuding with him as your mentor and your hero, as you said, competing against such an iconic figure on the showdown at Shea, for example. And also, I've heard in some of the interviews you've done that you were so hated at this point that there were times where you were actually put in danger by the crowds.
Every night.
If you could take us through a few of those instances or stories, that would be great to hear, too, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I'll paint a picture for you how it was. I mean, for me, it was kind of emotional. I'm a young guy. I'm full of testosterone. I got a beautiful chick in love with me, and I want to be on top of the world. And I've been around for, I'm still young for what I pulled off. I still at 26 or 27. For the last 5-6 years, I spent with the top guys and the top promoters and the top brains of, programming and the psychology. And so it got to the point where now Bruno broke his neck wrestling a match with Stan Hansen, and he was, over 40, and had other injuries, and he said, "That's it, I quit." And then he retired from wrestling and was doing the color commentating. And I was there being promoted as Bruno's protege, which got to the point where, once, you're labeled after a while to the fans, that's what the fans know you as and about as high as you're going to get. So I started freaking out because Bruno's retired. I'm Bruno's protege, but that's how people are knowing me. And then when it got to, getting main events, and I'm watching guys who I know I can beat, like Backlund and some other guys running around with top spots, I'm saying, oh, wait a minute. But then because I knew the business, I realized, if anybody can get Bruno back into the ring, the crowd would go nuts. Plus, the business of the WWWF was going way down. Without Bruno, they weren't selling out every month. And so the fans, I knew they wanted to see it again. And I think emotions just got out of control because it was tough for Bruno. I mean, I kind of went to him and said, "Hey, look, I need to wrestle, Bruno." And I'm talking to Vince Sr. and trying to work something out because I knew if I wrestled Bruno, there was no, plan to, stab him in the back. I was just trying to get my name out in the limelight so people would say, "Oh, Larry Zbyszko's great," and not say, "Oh, it's Bruno's protege. Who's the main event?" So it was kind of a weird time of realizing it's time to go after that dream and here's a chance. But then it kind of got blown out of proportion, and one day at TV I kind of lost it and thought he was maybe just trying to sidestep me, but it's kind of stupid of me at the time. So I whacked him with a chair, and it was the weirdest thing because normally people would freak out and the place was dead quiet. And I went home, and I had this weird feeling, and a couple of days later, the TV showed, and I was doing, some shows on the weekend. The first shows I ever did, since I hit Bruno in the head. But before that, people loved me. So I've got no idea, So I go out to the ring, and all hell breaks loose. I mean, I was the most hated man in the United States of America at that time. And they really meant it. I'd go up to the arena and I'd come out and my car's smashed. My windows are smashed. I didn't even think about it. Oh my God, So now I'm to the point where I got to sneak in. I'm hiding in someone else's trunk. I'm in my girlfriend's car. And I walked out of one show in Little Italy, and someone shot at me. There was a gunshot and some bricks, shattered above my head, walking out of an arena. And these riots were happening every night. I'm driving down the highway with my new Cadillac, and the mayor's hanging down, and the windows are smashed, and there's big, scrapes with key marks along the sides. And then, another typical night, I'd be in some show, and I'm wrestling Ivan Putski. And when I beat Putski, a big riot starts out. I mean, guys were jumping in the ring. It wasn't like today. There was no rails, and the security, you'd have 4 local cops there. So I'm walking out of the ring, and all of a sudden I'm in the middle of, hundreds of people on the floor, and they're coming at me, and one guy punched me in the face. So I grabbed him. I was going to punch him, but he fell down to his knees like he was trying to duck. So I kicked him in the face and knocked him out. So the 4 cops that were around me, which are now spreading out because they're pushing people away, the 4 cops grabbed this unconscious guy, and they're hitting them with slapjacks as they're dragging him away and leave me alone there. So the secret was to start acting like you've lost your mind, and you act crazy, and that startles people for a while, and you can run through the crowd. So I'm starting to run through the crowd, and all of a sudden I feel like someone kicked me in the ass, like I got a Charlie horse or something. And I make it back to the dressing room door and get back in there and I think Arnold Skolin was the agent. He came out and said, hey, it sounds like I started another riot out there, okay? But yeah, but I think someone kicked me in the end. I put my hand back there, and I feel this piece of metal, and I pull a knife blade out of my ass, because someone stabbed me in the ass. And then when I turned around, I broke the blade off. I mean, it was a wild time, brother.
Sounds it. Geez, well, that may answer the next question I have for you here. After hearing
I did keep a gun in the car most of the time.
I don't blame you. You might have been better bringing it to the ring. Sounds like it. But so anyway, like I said, that may lead into the answer to the next question I have for you. But it was 1981, not too long after the Bruno feud. You wind up leaving WWWF and went to the NWA and Georgia Championship Wrestling. Being that you just came out of this, high-profile feud with Bruno, one of, like you said, maybe the biggest star ever in wrestling. How come you leave that company then? And at that point, and how or why does your next stop wind up being in Atlanta?
Well, it was an old kind of another one of the ancient secrets of how to keep yourself a big star and always make money, and that was the bottom line as being a professional, was to make money. So, I've been in the WWWF now for already maybe 5 or 6 years straight. They loved me and Gorilla, and then they hated me, and Bruno's program maybe went 6-7 months, and I wrestled maybe 3 or 4 months after that. But then it got to the point where if I would have stayed there, I would have worked my way slowly back down into not meaning much. But because I had so much publicity, the other territories who were getting the magazines out of New York, that's where all your PR came from in those days, were dying to have me there because I was like the hot news. People would hear about you, but all the TVs were local, so nobody in the Georgia area saw me, or the Charlotte area, or the Minneapolis Midwest. So I kind of had a lucky break where I rode that big thing in Shea Stadium for years, and it opened doors. So I left the WWWF to go, Georgia, did some with the Crockett's, because that's how I made the most money without staying in the WWWF and working my way back down the ladder. If that makes any sense to you after a while. Because people get bored with you after a while. They'll hate your guts for a while, but then after a year or two, it's like watching the same movie you love over and over. I love this movie, but can't I see another movie? So,
sure.
But in those days, that was the good part of the business. The boys had different territories to go to, so you were always making money. And if you burnt yourself out in one territory, you can go to another. And that's what makes it tough today. There's the WWE. It's a tremendous companies worldwide. But if you bomb, you're bombing worldwide. There's nowhere else to go either. So there's a lot more pressure.
Sure. Well, again, I know I speak for Steve when I say, we grew up watching the different territories and things like that. It's a shame that isn't there anymore, So, sure as the workers go, you were just saying,
even if there was another big one like we used to have with WCW, the Wrestle Wars was great. We were the original Wrestle Wars show. Now they got Storage Wars and Junk Wars and Kicker Wars and everything's wars, but wrestling was the original Wars show.
Absolutely.
It's very interesting when you speak of the territories, because there's many stories, and maybe you've been privy to some of them or been sitting in on some of those legendary NWA meetings that they have out in the middle of nowhere, and very mafia-like setup with that. So when you speak of the Illuminati and the secret society, it certainly kind of goes hand in hand with that. So it's great to have been able to, so far in your career, you're brought into the business by Bruno Sammartino. It's maybe the feature program of the year when you blow it off in Shea Stadium. You move yourself down into another territory, Georgia Championship Wrestling, and you come in and now you're right into a feud for the National Heavyweight Championship at the time with the champion Paul Orndorff. and you had a couple of matches with him, weren't able to capture the title against him. Eventually, Orndorff gets beaten by Killer Brooks. You purchased the title from Brooks for, I believe it was a lofty sum of $25,000 at the time. And what we both can remember is one of the greater storylines of back in the day. And this is both about where mine and the Scum's memories start coming into play as far as things we remember as children from being able to get the Southern Broadcasting up in upstate New York. But long story short, you get stripped of the championship belt and actually win it back in an ensuing tournament after it gets vacated, and you beat another legend and another favorite of mine, Mr. Wrestling 2. Go back to this couple of years off in Georgia, first working with Orndorff, Killer Brooks, and Wrestling 2, and your memories of each of those competitors, both in and out of the ring, and then tell us how the whole angle of purchasing that national title came about.
Well, God, I got to go back and that seems like a million years ago. God, it's amazing how fast and it goes by when it's been a long time ago. But well, again, it was kind of everything I've learned in the business so far. Because to keep myself hated by the public, I guess is the easiest way to say it. Because that's how I made the most money, and that's how the territory made the most money. No one cares about the good guy unless there's a bad guy they really hate, So when I was wrestling Orndorff and that for the belt, Orndorff was a tough son of a bitch, and he was a tough, crazy guy, but hard to beat. But I think we manipulated something and threw him off with Killer Brooks. But then one of the things that I was taught, one of the other secrets, was trying to come up with something the fans never saw before, something new, again, a new movie to watch. But I didn't remember anybody buying a belt, and Killer Brooks, he was kind of a low-life kind of character anyway. But no one's ever bought a belt before, so when I bought the belt for him, from him, it was like an insult to the holy grail of wrestling. That was the Ark of the Covenant, the gold belt, So for its time, it was, again, something that no one's ever saw before. People hated my guts. I used to do interviews, too, about the South, and not only did the fans hate my guts, the Crockett's, who are from the South, they hated my guts. The promoters listening to me knock the South.
Crazy.
Well, it was fun. They had a good old day. But that was always one of the secrets, too, is, how to think is to pull something off. I bought the belt from Killer Brooks. Did a classic thing in the AWA with the roll of dimes.
Well, we're on the subject of some of these older time moments in the history of wrestling that you were involved in. Yet another, and again, now, I don't remember this happening before seeing you do it. I think it's happened a couple of times after, but with not as much fanfare. And certainly, this is something that I remember from being a kid, and I want you to clear it up for me if you could. Now, there's an angle with you involved, and myself and the Scum have had a debate on prior shows about this. You destroyed a title belt on television. And being a young kid, I'm very foggy as to which territory this even was, but I do vaguely remember you on a television broadcast just ripping the daylights out of the title belt. Was it that national heavyweight title, or am I thinking of something different?
You know what? I'm trying to think if you might be thinking of somebody different. I don't remember ever doing something like that. That don't mean I didn't, but I'm trying to remember. I really can't remember. I mean, if I did, it would have probably been the national belt, because I can't remember. I still got the Western States belt. I still got the AWA Heavyweight Championship belt. So it must have been the national belt if I did. Be honest with you, brother, some of them brain cells, might be sleeping.
Well, we have a contest each week called Stump the Scum, and I think I stumped the legend along the way.
Yeah, you stumped me. Oh, you know what? People come up to me in this silly Wikipedia. I mean, the world knows more about me than I remember. I've done, so many thousands of matches all over the world that, it's hard to remember each and every one. I remember spots when I was running for my life. God, the Philippines was a riot. The Saudi Arabians came in with knives under their sheets they're wearing, and people are throwing chairs on the balcony. Oh, it's crazy.
Well, when that was first brought up with the title bout, it kind of stumped Steve and the Scum when we were talking about it. We sort of remembered it being the national title, and maybe we were mistaken. Maybe that wasn't you that was, but I definitely remember when Steve was brought it up on the show. I remembered what he was speaking of. I think we were all a little foggy on that, so maybe we were all stumped that Steve the Scum and the Legend are all.
You never know. Someone out there might remember, if it was me or someone else. But I'm really not sure.
All right. Well, we'll move along then. Next up was when your first run in the AWA. You became the America's champion. Fittingly enough, feuded with Sergeant Slaughter over that title. How did the relationship with Vern Gagne that brought you to the AWA come about? And then where did the idea for the America's title come from? If I remember right, you were the first to have that title. So why, did you know why that championship was brought in? And if you remember, why did they decide that you were the guy to put it on?
Well, back again, I had a reputation that preceded me, and people knew about it. So everywhere I went, people hated me, I mean, people started, like in the later days coming up with some stupid word like, he invented stalling. And there was nothing with stalling, but they hated me so much I could just stand there and cause a riot, and people would go nuts. So it might have looked like that. But the AWA at that time, all of a sudden, the NWA on TBS, the AWA was getting on ESPN. Nationwide cable was, starting big time. But right before that, you got to look at what Vince McMahon, the current Mr. McMahon, did. He kind of exploded on the scene and pulled a move on all the other promoters, when they were off guard. Because, like I said, before contracts, there was a 2-week notice. That was it. That was the code of the business. And Vince, when national TV started, all of a sudden he made guys offers like Hogan and Bobby Heenan and Jesse Ventura, Mean Gene from the AWA, and Snuka and Piper and somebody from the NWA, and Junkyard Dog and other people from the other territories. So Vince basically took every territory's top guys. They all gave their 2-week notice, and they all ran to the WWF now. And it left the other promoters kind of on the hook. So in terms of me, it opened doors where the AWA and the NWA all, needed me and a couple other guys a lot because their top guys are all, taken off to the New York territory. So when I got to, the AWA, Vern, just like the Crockett's on TBS, we're all trying to compete against the WWF and nationwide cable. So the America's Championship, I'm sure, popped up because at that time the WWF, made up a new championship for their television, which was the Intercontinental title. So, there used to just be the world title and the tag team championships and Moolah. So, but now there was another title, the Intercontinental title. So then other territories, they'd pop up with the America's title. And the NWA would have the Western States Heritage Championship. And then there was a TV title. So they were all kind of competing with each other, and, someone did this and they do that. So it was probably kind of a copycat of what Vince was doing.
Sure. That makes sense. Well, getting back to when you were America's champion and working with Sergeant Slaughter, again, like I was saying, listening to some of your stuff that you've previously done interview-wise, as a fan of yours, I remembered another thing that you had talked about during that Slaughter feud where you were, would kind of get the crowd riled up by stalling. I heard you talk about that at one point in an interview. So I was just, if you could expand on that a little bit, it sounded like you had made reference to it previous about, some of them were some pretty lengthy stalls to get the crowd, riled up and angry with you. Could you speak to that a bit, if you can remember that?
Well, I just kind of incorporated a type of psychology, especially in the mid-'80s, But, I had a reputation. I was, in fact, when you got to the mid-'80s, there was me and some other guys like Flair and Arn and some others that were good in the ring. I mean, they knew what they were doing. But in the mid-'80s, too, that time you're talking and the business is changing to another era, most of the guys in the ring and most of the guys that promoters were pushing were a new breed of guys, the Hulk, the Macho, the Ultimate Warrior, the Road Warriors. So there was a whole bunch of new guys that didn't know squat about wrestling. They were just bodybuilders who were gassed out of their minds on steroids. They went for this surrealistic look where everybody looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the public back in those days, the fans were naive to this. They didn't know that these guys were all artificial products of, some kind of drug. And even the medical profession, back then when all these guys were taking their Diana ball and shooting their stuff, it wasn't even a controlled substance. No one, hardly anybody knew about it except the Olympics, Russians, and the bodybuilders in Venice Beach there. But, it's spread into the business. So now I'm in the ring, and the other guys are all in the ring working, but they all looked like, monsters and ridiculous, so it got people's attention, but none of them could wrestle. So they invented, the clothesline, I guess, where all they do is stand there and they'd run around and clothesline each other. And so I had to come up with something different. If I ran around and did a bunch of running around like they did, because that's all they knew, I wouldn't be any different. So I would go there and I worked the crowd a completely different way, which made my character different. And because they already hated me, I could get away with stuff, and I knew how to do it. If I could hardly do anything, and the people want to kill me. I have a record, 16 minutes without tying up and touching.
That's quite a style. I wasn't sure at the time, but I remembered there was quite a leg there. That's got to be the one I was remembering.
Well, that was the longest ever, but that was only because the people were going nuts. I mean, I would go like I was going to tie up, and I'd duck under the guy. He'd come after me. I'd step on the apron. And the people would start chanting, Larry sucks. And the longer they chanted, the more I stood there. When they started, when the chanting started to stop, I'd run back in to get the guy. He'd come in. I'd jump out again. Oh, they'd start again. So I was just doing things different, but I could only get away with it because the crowd was into it. Some places it could last a minute, and then they were tired of it, and then off I went. But the thing was, I had to develop a little different style because 90% of the other matches were all the same. Just a bunch of guys who were, slamming and clotheslining with no rhyme, no reason, and after a while the business, became stale, and then after 10 years of that, these guys would get in the ring, and now your audience isn't naive anymore. Now they're all smart. Now they're all, chanting steroids, steroids. So they went through that phase, and now they're getting back to more of a phase of real athletes that can really, get in the ring and do stuff. So it would be cool.
Sure. Well, that's fantastic stuff. You were certainly a master at getting the crowd worked up. No arguments here. But I'm sure you still are, for that matter.
Well, that's some of the secret Illuminati knowledge.
That's right. That's right. And back to that Larry Ron Kenobi, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, next in the AWA, you feuded with their world champ, Nick Bockwinkel, for an extended period, squaring off with him and Ray Stevens, who was his longtime partner numerous times. Eventually led to you, and you touched on earlier, a roll of coins giving an assist to Kurt Hennig, beating Bockwinkel and becoming world champion. And then you attacking Bockwinkel in a rematch that they had where you wound up banned from the AWA. Give us your memories of working either against or alongside these legends, Bockwinkel, Stevens, and Henning. And recall for us your banning from the AWA. Was that just a way to take you off TV because you were leaving the company, or was there more reasoning behind that?
Well, probably a combination of things. I mean, even when I got in the ring with Bockwinkel and Stevens and Von Raschke, some of the guys, I mean, we had some classic matches. And guys like Bockwinkel and Ray were classic, wrestlers. I mean, they were greats. They were the last of the old school era, those guys. The only bad part about it was when I was wrestling them, it was the mid and later 80s. And they were great in the 60s and 70s. But in terms of business, they were already getting kind of up there, And I remember one time, I don't know if I got a deal with the NWA or something, but again, back then, so it was easier for people to get into liking you or not liking you. There were rules. There was a structure, so if they thought, they never proved this, but if they thought I passed Curt Hennings a roll of dimes, there was a penalty to pay, so Stanley Blackburn, banned me, and so I couldn't wrestle, but I stayed there and I started doing some of, I think, like in this corner segments, so I'd keep myself on TV for a while. But back then, there was rules, and I think, like today, I think some of them it might be back, even bring back some rules, because every time you watch a match today, some guys are running in from here or running in from there, and I can't figure out why, this guy should win if someone runs in and helps him. There used to be disqualifications for stuff like that. But wrestling's been through different eras, It's been interesting. I've seen like 4 of them.
Sure.
Well, when you arrive into the NWA this time around with Jim Crockett Promotions, you come in with the beautiful Baby Doll as your valet/manager. And it was during this run that for a time you picked up a second manager, actually, Gary Hart. And, he and announcer at the time, Jim Ross, they would both voice strong opinions on the broadcast that not only you, but Al Perez, who was also managed by Hart, were deserving and had the ability to defeat NWA champion Ric Flair. First off, what happened there with the switch from Baby Doll to Gary Hart? And how did you like working with each of these managers? And second, what was the story, especially with Ross at the broadcaster position, voicing such a strong opinion that you and Perez had the tools to beat the champion? Was there a bigger plan there that never actually played out? And if so, why didn't it?
Well, let's see. Well, it was interesting because I was in the AWA for a while, and then, like, again, after a while, you don't want to become old news. So I left, for a little bit, and I had an offer with the NWA. And so I went to the NWA, and Baby Doll was the manager, and they had plans. The Crockett's wanted me to wrestle their top guys, and we actually started off a feud with me and Dusty, where Baby Doll had pictures of Dusty, that she was going to blackmail him with. And in one of the interviews, the Crockett's kind of insinuated that they wanted Baby Doll to run out and give Dusty a big kiss on TV. A big, old, juicy kiss, a kiss of death. But Baby Doll just married Sam Houston. And Sam Houston was kind of wacky. And he was jealous and throwing a fit. And when it came down to the interview, Baby Doll didn't run out and give Dusty the kiss of death because Sam Houston would be all jealous and freak out and all that stuff. So the Crockett's fired her because she didn't give Dusty the kiss of death. So that took care of Baby Doll as being a manager. Her and the secret pictures of Dusty disappeared off the face of the planet for a while. And then we did some things, with Al Perez. Al Perez was a very good wrestler, too. And Jim Ross knew that me and were both real good wrestlers. And some guys were real good wrestlers, and some guys had good bodies. But, And, in terms of Flair, who was a routine guy, there was me or Al in them days, probably would have had no problem beating Flair. That's one of the reasons me and Flair never got booked. They wanted me to wrestle him once in WCW, but he was afraid to get in the ring. So it never happened.
Very interesting that you say that. And before we move on to our next question, explain to some of our readers what a routine guy is. Well,
there were some guys that knew a lot of moves and some guys that knew certain moves. And if some guy knew a certain move, that's the match he had. And if you saw 10 of his matches, you'd basically see 10 of the same matches because he was a routine guy. That was his routine, That's what he did over and over. And back then you can get away with it because you weren't on national television. You were local and territorial and all that. But so some guys had a great routine that people loved and they could get a reaction to. So that's what they stuck with. And then over the years they just kind of wound up that way. But then there were other guys who weren't routine guys that could wrestle with anybody and could have any kind of match with anybody. If you wrestle a big, strong guy, it's a different kind of match than if you wrestled a little fast guy,
Certainly. And of course, being able to have that versatility is another reason why you were able to keep a career going for, still to this day, 20, 30 years into the making. But here we're at the time where we were talking about you and Jim Crockett Promotions, and right after that, it looks like you head right back to the AWA, and this is where Larry Zbyszko finally wins his first world championship, winning a battle royal, swapping it back and forth throughout the year with Mr. Saito. You end up being a two-time champion. You held the title until you left the company as it was on its last legs at this point. What did it mean to you to be finally recognized as a world champion after over 15 years in the business? And then what was your decision to leave while still the champion? Was it a difficult one, or was it just because you could see the writing on the wall and you needed to head to greener pastures? Or was there any worry?
Well, it was a little different story than that. It was just at the time when, throughout the mid-'80s, these factions, the NWA, the AWA, the WWE, were at war, basically, on national TV. But the AWA and the NWA, couldn't keep up with it. The old school promoters, like Vern and the Crockett's, held on to a way that was getting outdated. Like I said, if you watch the WWWF, you're watching Hulk Hogan wrestle the Ultimate Warrior, two new guys that look ridiculous. If you watch the AWA, I'm wrestling Ray Stevens, and Ray was great in 1968, And so towards the end, I did get a chance to go up there and win the heavyweight championship of the world, which to me was like heaven. I was in ecstasy because it was a closing chapter, I thought, and then there was even a bigger one later that I didn't think about, but it was a kind of a closing thought of my dream come true, where I wanted to be like my hero Bruno. Now I wind up on TV being called the living legend, and I'm the heavyweight champion of the world, and in my mind, I became like my hero. And I was almost right, but then everything worked out even better another, 7-8 years down the road from that. But, as far as the belt, this is an interesting story, too, because in the AWA, in those days when I was the champion, I could see the writing on the wall, and so could the Crockett's, because the Crockett's had to sell out to Ted Turner, otherwise, because their mother shut off their money. So Ted Turner bought the NWA, which became WCW, which had the same guys as the NWA. Now, the AWA, Vern being the old fighter that he was, we were trying to tell him to shut down the doors, close the business. You had a great run. You got millions of dollars. You're not thinking right to, do this, and why don't you just live happily ever after? But he wanted to hang in there, and he came up with an idea to save, the AWA and make it big and hot, where he wanted the AWA to invade the new company, WCW. Because even when WCW started, they weren't doing good business either, because it was still the NWA guys that everybody's been watching for the last 10 years. So they wanted to do an invasion thing where the AWA invaded WCW and kind of joined forces and worked together. And actually, there was an old promoter named Jim Barnett who was with the Turner people at that time, and he was afraid to do it. He kind of put the brakes to it because he thought that if I came in as the AWA champion at that time and wrestled their new kid, Sting, who was the WCW champion at that time, who just wrestled Flair like 1,000 times already. Jim Barnett thought, and told the people at TBS that, hey, Zbyszko's a different kind of guy. He can come in here with Sting, and he can kill this kid if he wants to. He can make him look bad. He can beat him and take our belt. And then he was kind of thinking like an old-school promoter might have thought in the old days. It was a different game. So the invasion thing with the AWA into WCW never happened at that time. But then, Vern finally shut the doors, but Jim Herd and the WCW wanted me to come in, so that's when I went in, because Vern basically finally said, okay, enough's enough. I don't want to lose my millions. I'm done. And he closed the doors and closed down probably the last mom-and-pop wrestling territory kind of thing. The funny part is, in 1996 or so, when Eric Bischoff wound up, from the AWA selling rubber ninja junk and bullshitted his way into a position in WCW, me and Greg Gagne were there. He'd always ask me for stuff, because in the AWA I used to help Eric out. So what was the idea we came up with that became the biggest, hottest thing ever? We just revived the invasion scenario, but it wasn't the AWA that invaded WCW. We called it the New World Order and made it look like the WWE was invading. And that's when we brought in Scott Hall and Nash and Six Pack, and and I was the one that programmed all that, and that's why I wound up wrestling Bischoff to save Nitro and wrestling Scott Hall. I just pulled off the AWA idea that never happened 6-7 years before that. And that's where that idea came from of the invasion thing, was from the old AWA, from the Gagnes. But then me and Greg were kind of in the office with Eric. We're the ones that started him off. So it all kind of like worked out the way it should be, I guess, in history. And then the New World Order, the invasion thing became the hottest thing ever. It was actually an old AWA idea.
That's incredible. And I certainly hope that you got your name on that patent, because that is going to go down as probably the most infamous invasion ever that actually worked. I guess you would answer my second part question, and upon leaving the AWA to WCW, there wasn't any tension or any worry that you would leave with the belt. It looks as though Vern Gagne actually may have wanted you to do that, so that seems to answer my question there. We'll move on a little bit. Let's talk about your time at World Championship Wrestling prior to that invasion with the NWO, and you wind up in on paper, and if you watched any of these old matches, as an old wrestling fan, a team of yourself and Arn Anderson as the Enforcers is a team to be reckoned with. They're the Enforcers.
Yeah. You know what? I mean, I wasn't big on tag teaming. I tag teamed with Gorilla a little bit at the beginning. It was more just like a learning thing, to brush up before I did the singles. Singles was the way to become the big star and make the big money in those days. But Arn was great. Me and Arn clicked. And And at that time, you know, like I said, when you had a bunch of guys that didn't know anything running around clotheslining each other into boredom, when me and Arn walked out together, you could feel that old heat. I mean, the people really bought it. And it was too bad. It should have lasted longer than it did, because I enjoyed it. Me and Arn got along good. It was the people bought into it. We pulled off some classics with the Steiners and who the hell was that? Bill Kazmaier and Barry Windham. We broke his arm, and we pulled off some really great stuff. But the damn politics in WCW kept changing every 6 months. Every 6 months was a new leader. You know, Jim Herd was the first one. He was the pizza guy. Why they have a pizza guy run a wrestling business, I have no idea. Then they threw him out, and they had a lawyer in there. Lawyer doesn't have a clue what he's dealing. He has no idea what he's dealing with. And then they decided, well, this ain't working. We'll bring in the next wrestler. So they brought in Cowboy Bill Watts to run it for a while. And when Watts came in, he started changing his, you know, the philosophies and throwing all kind of weird nonsense. And then they started like the Dangerous Alliance for a little bit, where they took me and Arn, which should have been a great team longer, but put him into a cluster group with the Paulie Dangerous Alliance, because they were trying to get, you know, Rude and Paulie and other guys established. But Bill Watts' idea was he didn't want anybody over 40 wrestling in the ring anymore. He thought that everybody that knew what they were doing were old news, and he was going to push the young guys. But the only young guy he pushed was Eric Watts. So that didn't work. That didn't work out good. And then WCW threw him out. But then when that happened, I didn't like groups. I didn't want to be associated with the group. You know. So that's at that time when I saw the politics change and that I thought it was time for me to change. And it just kind of like worked out, again, destiny. I didn't plan on it to change this way. I was looking more maybe in the office. But I wound up with color commentary. And they had Jesse Ventura doing it, but then they fired Jesse. And they asked me, they go, hey, because I just had a little knee operation. When they made the Dangerous Alliance, I went, oh, my knee hurts. And I pulled myself out of there before they buried me, because Watts didn't know what he's doing. So I'm sitting there, you know, rehabbing from the little knee scope. And the guy says, hey, can you do us a favor while you're sitting there? You know, I'm getting paid anyway. He said, can you know, we got rid of Jesse. Can you do this voiceover? So I said, yeah, I can come in and do that. So I went in and did some voiceovers on some pre-taped shows. And these guys come running in, and they're going, holy crap, you're the best guy we ever heard. You're great at this. And they make me an offer and to make more money working a day a week being a color man than wrestling. And then I was, 40 years old or so at the time, and the politics of the wrestling were changing. So I figured, well, what the hell? Again, you're back to that thing where if you keep wrestling, you become old news. So I said, so I gave it a try, and I wound up for, 7, 8 years or so doing the color. And then when I was programming the New World Order stuff, I was getting the good guys, Macho and Hulk and other guys were getting mad in the back because the color man was over more than they were. The crowd would chant Larry until I'd get up. Otherwise, they wouldn't stop it, and they had to start the show. So, but again, that's the psychology. I went from the most hated man ever to like the most loved color man ever. And then when I was doing that, and then I came out of the ring and wrestled Bischoff to save Nitro. And now that the people loved me and they called me the living legend, and I saved Nitro, but that's the time I really felt like my dream come true, and I really became like my hero Bruno, where they called me the living legend, and I saved the day and beat the bad guys, and that's when I really felt my dream came true, and I was like my hero. That was like the big cinch.
That's a pretty amazing story, and I can recall that match pretty vividly. And I think I was in the same room with a certain scum that we're talking to as well in upstate New York, watching that match on Monday Nitro. I wanted to talk real quick about the members of the Dangerous Alliance. Now, you made it pretty evident that wasn't really your cup of tea as being a part of a faction or a larger team, but individually you work with guys in that faction. Paulie Dangerously, of course, we all know Paul Heyman went on to be the owner of ECW and still in the wrestling industry today, still one of the top guys. Bobby Eaton, Rick Rude, and of course, stunning Steve Austin. Now, having worked with all of those guys, give us your thoughts on some of the guys that were in that faction, and tell us if you ever thought that Steve Austin would eventually soar to the heights that he did into the late 90s.
Well, I mean, the guys in the Dangerous Alliance, I mean, it was a good group of guys. Me and An got along great. Bobby Eaton was like a real quiet country kind of guy. Everybody, he's one of the guys, everybody liked Bobby. Hard-working guy, but he couldn't talk worth a damn. But he was great in the ring. Rick Rude had his own persona. He was basically a guy that shouldn't be in a group. He was the one-man show kind of guy. And Paulie, even today, he's the great old-school manager guy, and he was around, back when me and Gurria was around, but he was 13 years old, but he was following us around with cameras, and he loved the business, and he kind of came in at a time when there was still some psychology to learn. There was a good group of guys, but it just wasn't my cup of tea for me and my reputation, and besides, again, with Bill Watson, what they were doing, and the WCW, God bless them, they gave money away like crazy, but no one on top knew how to run it until that little stretch of time at the end of the 90s for a while.
So what I was going to move on to next, Larry, you kind of touched on there for a minute when you switched over to becoming a broadcaster. One thing that I did want to ask you there, when you first sat down at the booth there, you were working with Gordon Soley and Dusty Rhodes on TBS before, like you were saying, you became one of the most popular commentators of all time and everyone chanting your name every week on Nitro. What was it like working with the great Gordon Soley? I mean, growing up, he was always the voice of wrestling in my living room. Some memories of working with him?
Oh, yeah. Me and Gordon did a lot of shows that were the pre-taped ones, and he was a classic character. He came, from the era where the announcing was a one-man show. And he was great at it. Vince was great at the one-man show broadcast. But that's how it used to be in the old days. But when I worked with Gordon, I was starting off doing the color, and he was one of the guys too. But he knew the psychology of being a broadcaster, where when you were watching the matches, I don't even think the wrestling people and the big wigs realize how important your broadcast team is, because no matter what you do, how hard you work, what great idea you have, the announcers are the guys that really bring it to life, over the air. And Gordon was a guy that, he had a way that you could watch it, listen to him, and you would believe what was going on. And that's kind of what I stole from him, was how to do it in a way where people can believe and get really excited and get emotionally involved into it. And, Gordon was great to do that. And he was a character. I mean, we do a show and then we go across the CNN Center for lunch, and Ted Turner and Jane Fonda would be walking across, and all of a sudden Ted would run over and, "Oh, hi, Gordon. Hi, Larry." I mean, Ted was a big fan. And we go to Reggie's, and I'd have something to eat, and Gordon would smoke about 10 cigarettes and have a few drinks. And then we go back in the room, and he was better than ever. But he was a classic guy. Good guy.
Yeah, well, again, I can speak for Steve, like he was saying, watching in our younger years. He certainly did make it believable,
Yeah, but even Austin, you mentioned something about Steve Austin, and that was interesting too, because Steve and some of these guys, you know, even though they were a younger generation, because they were in top things, they were hanging out with guys like me and Arn and Flair and some of the old school guys that still knew stuff. And Steve was smart enough to pick up the psychology. I mean, from Stunning Steve, the way he looked with the long hair and Lady Blossom, Sidekick and all that, to the character he got over as, you know, Stone Cold, was really a great job. And I'm real proud of Steve. He was, you know, he developed a great talker, a great look, but then there's always that unknown wild factor that really makes somebody big, and it's called being at the right place at the right time. And Steve was, you know, had the right look, he had the ability to talk, but he was at the right time on cable when the rules were starting to lax and the censorship was starting to change. Steve was the first guy that could get on TV and talk tough. He could say ass on USA National Cable. He walked out, grabbed a beer, gave you the finger, and said, "I'm going to kick your ass." And people went nuts. He was the only guy that could say that on TBS and TNT. You couldn't say ass on TV. You couldn't say ass on network television. Back in the 80s, when the crowds used to chant "Larry sucks," the announcers never acknowledged it. You couldn't say "sucks" on TV. That was considered rude and crude, you know, and like saying ass. So Steve was also the first guy that could look tough and talk tough. You know, he was the first guy, but a year or so after that, everybody said ass, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Some more than others.
Yeah, but he was the first guy that could do it. So he was, you know, he had the right character, the right mind, and he was in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting back to where I was saying in the broadcasting and the believability, and you said you kind of took that from Gordon Soley. If I could move ahead to when you were the announcer on Nitro and you said that you programmed the NWO angle. Now, I know watching, it was pretty believable when you had your feud there with, you said with Bischoff, but also with Scott Hall. I mean, it really seemed you as the traditionalist and, you know, kind of the old school wrestler. It seemed like when they would come out and do the, you know, the cool kind of shtick that, you know, that really got under your skin and led to you and Hall working a program. Could you speak to working with those guys at that time, specifically Scott Hall and the NWO? I mean, because I remember that being fantastic TV. Where really, it really came across, like you said, believable, as you put it, taking that from Gordon Soley.
Yeah, I mean, people believed the WWE was invading, and it kind of came across too, because, you know, I programmed the beginning the way he came in and Nash, and they invaded this and invaded the truck out back, and then one time during a commercial break, Bischoff, Nash, and Hall were in the ring, and we went to a commercial break, but this was before we had the set up on stage. We were sitting next to the ring doing the announcing. And Scott Hall came over and said something to me, and I stood up and took off the headphones, but this was during a commercial, and the people erupted. I mean, they erupted like it was me and Bruno. They just, you know, blew and as soon as I felt that, because it caught me off by surprise, I said, that sounds like money. So then as soon as I realized that, but then Bischoff wanted to get, you know, involved. So I put Scott off. So instead of me and Scott rushing right into it, we teased it along and made the people want it more. And I threw Bischoff in the middle before I wrestled Scott. You know, and it just made everything hotter. And it was more of a swerve and caught people more by surprise, and, you know, it was more believable. I mean, and, you know, it was weird. I mean, I think every other person on the planet had an NWO shirt back then.
Right.
It was huge.
Sure.
I mean, they were doing, like an 11 rating between the two groups. I mean, it was, you know, if there's a way to get it that hot again, I'm thinking.
Right. Yeah, it was exciting stuff, definitely. I mean, it was a great time to be a fan. I'm sure it was a great time to, like you said, you stand up, you take the headset off, and you hear that crowd roar is almost like a cash register, right?
Well, yeah, but you got to remember, too, it stuck out so much because prior to that, during the early 90s, WCW was plugging along with Flair and Wyndham and Dusty and Sting, and they've all wrestled each other 500 times, and their business was kind of stale. And the WWE was going along with their guys. So it's like wrestling was, kind of going up and down on the down part of the curve. So the people were dying for something new, and that's when things just kind of worked out. Where one day Ted Turner said, "Hey, I want to spend a lot more money and go head to head," and it was just lucked out that was the time Eric was there, and he didn't know what to do. So we said, "Well, hey, we'll do the Invasion angle from the AWA days," and that became history. That's how that happened.
Sure did. Well, all right. Moving along in your WCW time as an announcer, let's moving forward to the final days of WCW. You were on the Nitro announce team, like we were just talking about. The crowds loved you. For whatever reason, you eventually moved over to Thunder, and then eventually off the shows until you parted ways with the company late 2000. Why would they take a legend, as yourself, who the crowds everywhere would chant your name and off that show? And what led you leaving the company in 2000? I mean, even though you weren't there at the end, everyone has a take on it. So, just wondering what your take from someone with your insight and time in the business. What would you say were the overall deciding factors that led to the ultimate demise at WCW?
Well, here's what happened. There's a lot of stories and whatever, but here's what happened. Eric lost control of the ship, basically. And at the time he lost control of the ship and things were getting goofy, Turner sold Turner Time Warner, was bought out by AOL. And AOL basically swerved them because they thought they had more money than they did, but AOL bought Turner Time Warner, and Ted didn't have the 51% power anymore. AOL didn't like sports. They're a bunch of nerds, so they didn't want wrestling on TV. They didn't want the Braves. They didn't want the basketball, So, and the way it was structured, you got to remember the WWE is a company. It was a wrestling company. WCW Nitro, that was just a television wrestling show owned by Turner Time Warner. You could cancel a show, you can't cancel a company. But AOL didn't want the show. They just wanted to cancel it. But they had, like a year or so left of contractual commitments with arenas and pay-per-views and this and that. So what happened was, right after everything was hot and starting to kind of crumble because Eric lost the grip on it. This all happened with AOL, and they knew they were going to cancel WCW in a year or so when everything was up. So they took Eric out of the power position, and they put in an accountant named Bill. Bill Hunt, maybe something. Bill. Nice guy. Doesn't have a clue about wrestling, of course. But all his job was, before, they gave away money like it was candy. Bill's job was now not to spend any money because they're getting ready to shut the doors and cancel the show. And what Bill did was Eric and his buddies, were gone. Bill, who doesn't know anything, brings in this idiot, Vince Russo, who was writing for the WWE. And Bill says, and I've already known about this guy, and as far as I'm concerned, he's a cancer. And Bill says to me, hey, I got McMahon's writer coming in. And I said, Bill, you got to be kidding. He goes, oh, no, and it was easy. He wasn't even under contract. I said, Bill, he wasn't under contract, and he's not important. So anyway, this goofy Russo comes in, and by the time he came in, and they started Thunder, it went back to stupid nonsense with some idiot that has no idea what he's doing. And instead of doing business, which was going to get shut down anyway, he brings in his friends. So they moved me to Thunder. When they moved me to Thunder, I was pissed. Not just pissed because I knew they were idiots, pissed because I knew all this hard work and the biggest, hottest wrestling we had ever was about to die. So I did Thunder a little bit, but now my contract was coming up, the end of it. And so was Bobby Heenan's. And so I was doing Thunder a little bit. This guy Russo was, they just threw him in there to keep the shows going, but they didn't want to spend any money because they're going to cancel it. So Russo just kept doing stupid stuff where people and the pathetic part was we had a guy that was the next Bruno, Goldberg. People loved him. He was hot. It would have been great. But, instead of Goldberg being the champion, the heavyweight champion of the world was Russo. And some idiot little skinny puke David Arquette. I mean, the whole thing just turned to absolute manure. Absolute manure. And the funny bit was, the company came to me and Bobby and said, when your contracts are up, we're not renewing anybody's contract. And I already knew people there, so I already knew the show was getting canceled. And the funny bit was Bobby said, you're not renewing my contract? Well, shove it up your ass. So Bob had like 2 months on his contract left, but still he refused to go into work. He refused to go do anything. Because now you got this slob Mark Madden sitting on Nitro picking his nose, and God knows what else was horrifying. Everything was horrifying. So Bobby wouldn't go back, and I didn't have the heart to do that to the company. They were paying me a lot. So I said, I'll finish doing the show till my contract's up, and then good luck. But then, they canceled everything. And then, McMahon bought the name and the library of tapes. But it was really kind of mostly the fact that AOL bought them out and just didn't want it. And it's stupid. The library of tapes, TNT could have had programming for years, cheap, great programming with the whole history that they owned. But AOL's a bunch of morons. I refuse to do any AOL products. I won't give AOL a dime.
I don't blame you there. I figured you'd have an interesting, take with being there at that point in time. Just wanted to see. I figured it would be somewhere along the lines of what you had to say, but just wondering. Throw it back over to Steve here. We just got a few more questions for you here, Larry.
Oh, go get me.
Ironically enough, we, myself and the Scum were in Syracuse, New York that night. I think it was April 26, 2001. David Arquette winning the title. Yeah, we actually paid for that, Larry.
Yeah, we were paid in the attendance that night. So,
well, I'm sure they appreciated it, but I don't know. You were horrified. I didn't even watch it. As soon as my contract was up, wrestling was not allowed, and I still had kids that were kind of young. Wrestling was not allowed in my house, and then they started doing all the raunchy stuff. It was a cancer, just a cancer.
Yeah, I have to say some of the angles at that time as a wrestling fan that had been watching wrestling even at that point for a good, 15 years or so some of the stuff was a little bit too vulgar, I would say. I don't know. Again, I'll sit down and watch Brody and Abdullah fillet each other for an hour and a half. Not a problem. But when it came to, if I wanted to go with a wad full of one somewhere, if you get my drift, I think I could. But
yeah,
anyway.
You're watching a wrestling show. I don't want to see two chicks in a hotel pretending to kiss each other and be lesbians. It's a wrestling show. I don't want to see this crap.
Right.
Yeah, especially when you got Nicole Bass in the mix. We can maybe move on from there.
When you're sitting there with your kids, you go, okay, kids, it's no more wrestling. Click.
So it's that time frame now that we're speaking of, and we'll stay there for a little bit. The Vince McMahon, the buyout of WCW, the debacle of and again, maybe they should have got you on the line for some good storyline advice on how to do a proper invasion angle. We recently talked with Scott Hudson, who kind of agrees with you as far as the end of the invasion angle and how well it wasn't received by the WWE audience at the time. Did you ever have any interest, or was there any sort of olive branch extended your way in regards to being involved with the relaunch in WWE? And for that matter, it would seem like, and you mentioned this, from 1989 all the way up through when you gave your Hall of Fame induction speech to Bruno, you really weren't involved in any way, shape, or form with Vincent Kennedy McMahon. In addition to addressing whether there was interest from either you or Vince in being involved after the buyout, could you speak to why or what the reasoning may have been as to why you never returned to the company after your feud with Bruno back in 1980?
Yeah. Oh, well, you know what? Yeah, back in 1980, 81, I left there, and I wound up with other territories because Vince had all their talent. So it worked out, good, and the WCW was a real good run. I had a good 10-year run at WCW, but then after, when they came in and, again, I really, for a while, emotionally and with the kids, I didn't watch it, so I really don't know what happened. I know that, Shane McMahon showed up one day and they claimed they bought it, but I didn't really see any of that, what they did, and the reason I really didn't rush back, Jim Ross called me one time and when this was happening and asked me if I wanted to come in and broadcast on SmackDown. They had Jerry doing Raw, and they wanted me to do SmackDown. I said, oh, well, that sounds interesting. But you know what? I had another dream. I mean, seeing the becoming Bruno dream came true. When this all happened, I had enough money in the bank, and my kids were watching my kids grow up. So I kind of took an early retirement for a while. And I was too old to go wrestle anyway. So it wasn't like I was going to go into WWE and wrestle anybody. I was already 50 now or something. So I wanted to try professional golf. So when I hit 50 and all the WCW was over, I played on some of the pro mini tours. I came to Florida and was playing on the Hooters Senior Tour, and I played qualifiers. So I was playing professional golf for a couple of years. And then watching the kids grow up, and then, now they just all graduated. So, I kind of took a 10-year vacation, from the wrestling business and did what I wanted to do with the golf and got the kids raised, and they're all, doing good. No one's on drugs or alcohol, so that's all I cared about. And now I'm kind of sitting around getting bored, but I'm probably going to be, I am involved with the WWE now. I'm doing DVDs for them and the Legends deal and some other things that, will be coming up. So it looks like I'm not done yet, guys.
Good. Well, that's good to hear.
Fantastic. Yeah, you picked up, how recently was the Legends contract? Is this something that you have brought to light in other outlets, or I hadn't heard of that before?
Well, no, we did that maybe a year ago or so. And then I filmed some DVDs with them, and things worked out with Bruno, and and I helped them out with that too a little bit. Bruno did the Hall of Fame, and then I'm doing Bruno DVDs, and I'll be on those, and then they got some other projects going. And then they opened their performance center 5 miles down the street from my house. They opened it in Orlando. Beautiful facility. Top notch. Where all the young guys now are going to be training right down the street. So that sounds like kind of a no-brainer.
Sure.
Yeah,
sure.
I think any young talent.
Larry One Kenobi may have to do an Illuminati appearance.
That's right. I like that. I like that. That name might stick, You better watch it.
Hey, that's okay. We'll make a T-shirt.
That's right.
Got to make a buck off it, absolutely. For any young kid wrestling at that school and going through some training to have Larry Zbyszko walk through the door and be like, hey, kid, listen to me real quick. That's got to be something, and hopefully whoever that lucky guy is will certainly pay attention. No, Larry, we really, really appreciate your time. We got the living legend, Larry Zbyszko, with us at WGD Weekly. Got a couple more questions for you. I got one. The Scum's got one more for you, and we'll get you back to TV. Hopefully there's something good on tonight.
Yeah, I'm getting hungry now. What time is it? Gee.
Oh, boy, 7:30 Eastern. We'll get it going.
Oh, it's pizza time.
Yeah, maybe you can call Jim Hurd for a pizza.
Well, you know what? Yeah, Jim, deliver me a pizza in 30 minutes or less. You know, the funny bit is, now that the kids are gone, you know, me and the wife, I mean, she doesn't cook big meals anymore because no one's here to eat them. So it's like, you know, fast foods, Chinese food, pizza, Subways. Yeah, it's
rough when you're with your wife and you ask her what's for dinner and she throws you your cell phone.
Yeah, here, call the Chinese place. I want some sweet and sour chicken.
Oh man. Well, Larry, I got one more question here for you. Like I said, we'll throw it over to the Scum for one more after that. But let's talk about your time in TNA wrestling. You worked there for a couple of years, had several different on-screen roles in your time there. You left in 2006. You know, let's start off with what lured you back at that point to be hired and start working for TNA, and what are the deciding factors for you to even leave the company in 2006? And, you know, what are your thoughts on their current product if you do watch it? And do you think they have the legs that it takes to survive the long haul and compete with Big Vince up in Connecticut?
Yeah. Well, you know what? I mean, TNA, I mean, like, you know, WCW ended, and I was, you know, taking a break, and then a couple of my buddies said, you know, like Mike Tenay, he's one of the guys I broke in with the broadcasting and that, and they said, hey, there's a new group starting up, you know, TNA, and they'd love to have you involved doing something. And I said, well, you know, but it was a thing like, you know, one day a week, or they'd film every couple of weeks. They were starting in Nashville, and I was still in Atlanta. So I said, well, okay, you know, we can try this out. So they had some idea about maybe me managing AJ, but they were, you know, didn't get off to a good start. I mean, they tried, and they had some good young talent, you know, but, you know, the Jarretts tried to get it going, but then their backer, you know, backed out on them, and they were just about to close the doors, but then the Panda Energy, you know, Dixie's company, she needed a client for her new promotional company or whatever, so she took over to TNA, and the Carter family, you know, backed them with the Panda Energy, probably put millions, they must have put millions of dollars in. Amazing. But, you know, so I did some work with them there, and then, like I said, I played the professional golf. So I was down around Orlando, and then all of a sudden TNA comes down to Orlando and starts filming and asks me if I'd want to get involved again. I said, well, yeah, I can get involved in that. And, you know, because, again, you know, once a week or once every 2 weeks, whatever it was right down the street from me. So, you know, so I wound up working with them. And you know, for a while I was excited because, again, I had a chance to share some Illuminati knowledge. Unfortunately, they didn't want to hear it. They were very nice. The Carters were very nice. It was a fun time, but I could see the writing on the wall. And, again, Jeff Jarrett, you know, not thinking business, thinking buddies. Who does he bring in to help, you know, run the place? Vince Russo, the cancer is back, and they started, you know, going down the tubes. And then when I moved to Orlando, I worked with them a little bit, but then it got to the point where, you know, it just wasn't worth it, and I was getting frustrated because I'm watching them do these stupid things, and it was just time for me to go golfing. So, I mean, they were very nice, and the talent was, you know, a bunch of great young guys. But if you look at TNA today, I mean, like 10 years ago, they had some great matches. AJ Styles versus Chris Daniels. Now, 10 years later, like 6-7 months ago, I'm clicking through TV, and I stumble across TNA because I really don't watch it. And what's the main event? AJ Styles and Chris Daniels. They've been wrestling each other for 10 years. I couldn't believe it. It's like, don't these people understand? And then they, you know, instead of guys that can do something, they're blowing their wad on Hulk, God bless him, but he can't walk anymore. Eric, who, you know, listened to a couple of guys, pulled something off, took credit for it, but everything he's getting involved with after that sings because he don't know and he won't listen, you know. And Sting, who was one of the luckiest men that ever lived, Sting, he couldn't do a good interview. He couldn't work good. We had to drop him from a ceiling for a year and dress him like the Crow and not let him say a word to get one big match out of him. So they just made wrong decisions. And to be honest with you, from what I hear, Bob Carter, nice guy, good guy, old school guy, but he had a hard time saying no to his daughter, Dixie. And finally, they blew so much money with no results after 10 years that Bob resigned, and now I think the mother took over, and she's controlling the purse. But I think you can see, from what I hear, rumors, this guy's now fired, and this guy's now fired, and if you want to stay there, you can get the pay cut. Half the guys wrestling there are on food stamps. I was shocked when I heard that one. To be honest with you, to be honest with you, they're a good bunch of people. The talent, it would be nice that, if wrestling had that competition for the fans to get into, but TNA is no match, and we'll never, they just won't be. The WWE is it. And I say that with kind of pride because, after being involved with them for over a year and stuff, it's really amazing that I can't say enough great things about the company. The WWE over the years has really morphed into a great company that takes care of guys. Putting these guys through rehab 10 times, you think Bruno would do that? It really turned into a hell of a place, and the people I've dealt with there have been very nice. Very nice, and it's a thrill to be with them after all these years, and it's kind of like nostalgic for me because I'm finishing up my life and career in the same place I started. So it's like the natural cycle, It's like the destiny is making that full circle and coming to an end.
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, the last question I had, you touched on you being back there working with WWE, but first I want to throw in quick with it. You've brought up a couple of times now about you got into the professional golf and brought me back to when you were talking about you and Arn Anderson and breaking Barry Windham's arm. Now, out on the links there, you ever wrap a 4-iron around somebody's knee or anything when it got heated? Or?
No! No, you know what? Golfing, I did a lot of it. I'm very good at it. In fact, even the last 10 years of WCW broadcasting I worked a day and a half. I flew out, actually 1 day a week before Nitro, and then when Nitro started, I flew out and do Nitro and then go in Wednesday and do a half a day of some pre-tape shows. So for that almost 10 years with them, I lived on the golf course. I played golf 2-3 times a week at least, and I got real good at it. So when I was out in the pro, I was just 3 strokes not good enough to win big money. If I turned in a 69, I was happy as hell. But the top guys are turning in 65, 66, and they're mad that they had a 66, had a bad day. So I was good, but just not good enough for big money. So the novelty wore off after a couple of years there, quick, but. A guy used to golf with the Steiners and Lex Luger. Luger was a classic because he was so muscle-bound he couldn't hit a golf ball to save his life, but he was such a narcissist that it couldn't possibly be him. So if you golf with him on Monday, he was horrible. Then you'd golf with him on Thursday, him and the Steiners or Sting, somebody come play golf. And Luger would, every time he golfed, he had a new set of clubs. He bought a new set of clubs because it couldn't possibly be him. He was convinced it was the clubs.
That's funny. We actually have Lex coming on the show next week. Maybe I'll ask him about those clubs.
Let's ask him about that.
Suddenly turning right real quick.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, we used to go golf with me, him, and Steve, and some other buddies, and it's funny. Would you get new clubs? Yeah, I couldn't hit them other ones. Those weren't good clubs. Oh, okay,
sure.
Lex.
Got to be the clubs. But,
yeah.
So anyway, to wrap you up here, Larry, we appreciate you taking time out of your evening here and being with us. Back to your returns now working with WWE. obviously, everyone knows you were part of the Hall of Fame ceremony with Bruno coming in. Just wondering, first off, how were you approached about that? Who reached out and approached you to do this, to be involved with the Hall of Fame ceremony and Bruno's induction? And secondly, something I know both myself and Steve are wondering as longtime fans of yours, has there been anything said, or do you feel that offer might be extended to you? I mean, you certainly are deserving to be in the Hall of Fame. Do you see that in your future anytime soon?
Oh, well, I'm pretty sure. I mean, not now that things are the way they are, I'm already kind of with them. So I'm pretty sure I'll be in the Hall of Fame. And I was, I got to tell you guys, I didn't do the induction. When Bruno, I kind of helped smooth out some ice at the beginning when they wanted him, because they've been wanting Bruno for years. But after Bruno checked out the company and had a lot of talks with some people, he realized it's become a great company, and there's no more reason to, have any personal stuff. And I was, but they invited me there, and actually Arnold Schwarzenegger did the induction. It was going to be me or Arnold. And Arnold was a big Bruno fan, big fan, and he really broke up his schedule to fly out there and do it. And in terms of business, I said, hey, if you can get Arnold. Don't worry about me. It's better for the thing. But it was real nostalgic. Vince and Bruno were hugging on stage. I almost started crying. I'm sitting there in the Madison Square Garden for the first time in 30 years, watching these two guys hug, and I'm trying to, wipe my eyes so the boys don't see anything, kill my image. But it was a very touching night. It was awesome, and it's amazing. I'm still in awe of how huge and great the business has become, and now it's a global WWE universe and a global business. From the days of the territory to the globe, and I was lucky enough to be in it all. So it's very cool.
Yeah. Well, hey, I would have liked to listen to you induct him myself, but I hear what you're saying business-wise. You can get Arnold. I guess you get Arnold, right?
Well, yeah. Then I said, well, hey, to get Arnold, don't worry about me. I'm not going anywhere.
Sure.
Yeah, have you had an opportunity in the recent past here to have spoken with Vince one-on-one?
You know what? I haven't bumped into Vince, since this. I've been doing some things like a Mania, but I was running around doing access and signings and filming a lot of DVDs. And then when they filmed the NXT shows, they filmed that right down the street here. But I haven't bumped into Vince yet. I haven't seen Vince since 1981.
Wow.
Yeah. No, I can't wait to see him. He'll be very nostalgic. And I tell you, I saw him on Smack. He looks great.
Yeah.
Between you and me, he's one of the best characters he's got.
Definitely.
Yeah, he's probably my favorite heel of all time, and he's a hell of a worker. He got in the ring with CM Punk. Scum, help me out. 7-8 months ago.
Yeah, it wasn't that long. We were talking about it.
It was the most exciting 20 minutes on Raw in at least a year.
Yeah, it was great.
Oh yeah, I remember that. He dove across the table. The place went nuts.
Right. Yeah.
No, Vince is a classic, and he died for his creation and the fans. You can't take it away from him. And in fact, if you saw what WWWF was in the days of the carnivals to what Vince made, the empire he made is really amazing because he really started with a mess. He didn't inherit no big business. He had an opportunity and he did it right.
Sure.
You're talking to two guys that agree with you 100%, and and you can if you're a wrestling fan and you get on the internet, there's a billion outlets, and that's always been a topic for discussion, and we take your side 100% on that. But let's talk about your son, and let's talk about I Believe in Wrestling for a few minutes and the training facility that you're working with down in Florida, and how is your son's career going?
I thought I was off the hook. I got 4 boys, and none of them expressed any interest in the wrestling. and they're good-looking guys, but none of them are like, big giant monsters either. And then all of a sudden, God, maybe a year and a half ago, Tim, who was like 28, calls me up. He was working in like Oregon or someplace, and he's in the hotel business, and he says, I bumped into this indie guy, and I did a couple of workouts, and then I think I could be great at this. It's in my blood. I'll never ask for anything. I said, oh, my God, no, And so he came here to Florida, and he's doing good. He's not married. He got no kid, but he's like, 30, so he's getting to the point now where, getting old enough to give it a shot, and I'm helping him. I mean, some of my friends got this school that I believe in, wrestling school. And I'm not really involved with it in any official way, but because there's some friends of mine, once in a while I stop by, and my kid's been working out there, so I'll stop by once in a while. And he's very good. He's got a natural ability. He's got a good charisma. He can talk. I mean, he can be very good. He's 6 foot tall and 210 pounds, like 90% of the guys. So it's just a lot of competition. So I just don't want him to like ruin the job he's got. I mean, if he gets a chance, we'll see what happens. But you got 50,000 guys trying to get 10 spots, and again, there's only one place to go. Otherwise, wind up hurting, no money. I mean, I don't know how these indie guys do it. They're all getting killed, and no one's paying them. There's 50 people in the audience, and they're diving off into the tables and breaking their legs, and promoter don't even pay them, let alone pay the hospital bill. I mean, I don't know how they do it. It's almost like an underground insanity, But at least the school that, they got, the Belief School, is very good, and it's kind of like some of the Illuminati secrets are, but it's just tough getting a break in it. So he may get a chance to, get a tryout, but, that's his destiny. But he's got the ability. I told him to, do heavy benches and gain some more weight, and we'll see what happens.
Sure.
That's excellent.
We wish him the best of luck, definitely.
Totally. Maybe we'll have him on the show one day here when he's ready to go. Has he had any good matches yet so far, or is he still just doing the training? Or?
Oh, he's had some matches, and most of them, local around here, and I'll go watch and give him some pointers and stuff, and so we'll see. I mean, I don't want to get excited about it, and I don't want to get him excited about it. We'll see what happens because there's so much competition. And the WWE, too, I mean, if you look at a lot of their roster, everybody's kids there. And I think they're getting to the point where they might, not that it's not fair, but it's hard to keep promoting everybody's kid. It's too much of the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that recently. Some of them already leaving now.
Well, yeah, I mean, they've been there, they're there. But on the other hand, I mean, somebody got there like Randy Orton. I love Randy Orton. He's got a great look. He's got a great composure. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the guys' kids are really good.
Yeah. Cody Rhodes is really
Cody's very good.
Yeah.
And the Samoans got some kids that are very good.
Oh, boy, there's 3 kids right now still from the Samoan family that are in there. Roman Reigns and then, of course, the Uso brothers. They're fantastic performers.
Oh, yeah, and Roman's got a great look. He should have a good future, It's just tough. So, I mean, if he gets a chance, God bless him, but, it's just something you can't count on nowadays.
Yeah, well, it certainly can't hurt to have him channeling once again that Larry Juan Kenobi and it's
Larry Juan Kenobi.
Absolutely. If you can only show up in like that shadowy bluish hue that they have of all the in the middle of the ring.
Yes, my lightsaber.
I was going to say we've seen a lot of foreign objects over the years. I don't think I've seen a lightsaber yet.
No. Be a nice clean cut, though. You wouldn't have to worry about too many butterfly stitches after that one.
Yeah, it cauterizes the blood so you don't got blood everywhere.
Folks, we got the living legend, Larry Zbyszko. We wanted to thank you once again for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure for both of us. Speaking for the Scum here. Incredible, and we'd love to have you back on the show anytime you like, Larry.
Well, guys, just let me know, and we'll see what happens in the further adventures of Larry Land here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for coming on, Larry. It has been a thrill for both of us and a pleasure to have you. We really appreciate it.
Well, best of luck to you guys too, and we'll as they say, we'll see you on the road.
Well, Scum, there you have it. Another fantastic interview with the living legend, Larry Zbyszko. He didn't pull any punches. He went right through the whole gambit of his career, starting from crawling under the bushes in Pittsburgh at Bruno Sammartino's house, all the way up to his retirement, working with the WWE, ran the full gauntlet of his whole career. We really appreciate his time. What did you think of our interview, Scum?
Well, I would say if there's one moral of the story here, Steve, for our listeners out there, young, old, and in between, that is if you really want to get where you would like in life, stalk your heroes. Because apparently that works, climbing through the bushes to Bruno back there sunbathing led to quite a bump, let's say, for the living legend Larry Zbyszko from the original living legend, Bruno Sammartino. I never heard that story before there, and what a career it was. I mean, what a difference in the times that, the decades that he was a part of the business. How about when he started the Bruno feud and the pin drop silence reaction to the chair shot, followed by him getting his car trashed, getting shot at, knocking some fan out, kicking them in the face, getting stabbed on the way back to the locker room. I mean, times have changed a little bit, my friend.
Oh, absolutely. The guy got stabbed in the backside on his way from the arena. Unbelievable stuff. Now, consider the fact of where the wrestling industry is now, and you got, of course, you got the big name at the top, and you got a couple companies that are extremely smaller than the top company, and then below that it's in the Wild West out there. It's just mayhem, but at no point in time is there anything like that happening nowadays. So it's amazing to hear some of these older stories, of course, from some of the legendary figures in the world of professional wrestling. Larry Zbyszko at the top, and I'll tell you, not a lot of people can have that dual career of the highest amount of success in the wrestling ring and then walking into becoming an announcer and doing a quality job at that and being a great storyteller and being a good heel along the way. And, of course, his job was kind of a dual role as the announcer there. He played the heel well, but as the NWO came into the factor, he kind of switched sides naturally and supported WCW, was one of the first guys from WCW to step in the ring with the NWO and put up that fight. And it's certainly something that I know I remember watching with you, Scum, so it's certainly in the forefront of your mind as well.
Absolutely. Not to backtrack on what you said about that dual roles that he had. How about a trifecta, pro golfer, too?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We're sure to hit on that. It sounds like Larry has some game out on the course there, too. But a couple things I wanted to touch on. NWO certainly was one of them. Just a bevy, let's say, of things that Larry dropped that I never heard before. I don't know if maybe it's because he doesn't do a lot of the interviews. We were privileged to have him on and on at such length. I mean, what a great guest he was. But the one thing when you I think you touched on the question about when JR and Gary Hart were saying that Zbyszko and Al Perez were talented enough to fight Flair, and then he said Flair wouldn't fight him. I couldn't help thinking that he could have pulled the old Greg Valentine. I broke Wahoo's leg, and Larry could have rocked the I scare Flair. You remember Piper used to say that. I meant to throw that in, and he was so interesting. I was so enthralled by what he was saying that I never got around to it. Another thing that I never had heard of, getting back to the NWO, is Larry took the idea from when they were trying, I believe he said they were trying to talk Vern or Greg Gagne and him were trying to get the AWA to invade the NWA, or what eventually became World Championship Wrestling, when he jumped over right before the end of that era that was the AWA, when they closed shop. And eventually he brought that about to Eric Bischoff to create the NWO. And then being a part of it, he fought Bischoff for control of Nitro in what was Bret Hart's debut in WCW that night at the same Starrcade. Bret was the referee in that match, and then moved on to the program with Scott Hall that I brought about just because I remembered it being so great, seeming so real. And he said when he stood up and took the headset off, he could hear one thing when that crowd popped: money. I like that a lot.
Yeah, coming from two old veterans, even at the time, Scott Hall had certainly served his time well. So looking at the careers of guys like Larry Zbyszko and guys like Jim Ross, they've done some incredible things in dual roles. Jim Ross was an announcer, Larry Zbyszko a wrestler, of course, in and out of the ring, all throughout the wrestling business, to be a well-rounded piece of talent. And that's something that I think some of the guys nowadays are a little bit more focused on just one thing. And when you are working in a company that is, looks to be a lot bigger than it is, larger than life, so to speak, on television, and I'm talking not so much about WCW and nor WWE, but as you come up, you have to work through the territories back then, and, was maybe nothing more than a local affiliate TV station, but, they took it and grabbed the ball and went with it. And for Larry Zbyszko to have been able to get to the WWWF and work at such an early age says a lot for just straight talent. And I understand what he had mentioned, that Bruno, he was Bruno's guy, and Bruno was going to take him wherever he wanted to go. And a lot of the older talent at the time, and guys, you're talking Hall of Famers, guys that everybody knows if you follow, the glory days of professional wrestling. Chief Jay Strongbow comes to mind immediately, guys that were really nice to him and offered him advice because he was the ward, so to speak, or the protege of Bruno Sammartino, and they knew that getting on Larry's good side would certainly help them advance in their careers.
Sure. I mean, I think Gorilla Monsoon was one of those that he brought up there, and the names that he worked with throughout the eras from Bruno and Monsoon, and like you said, Chief Jay, and then in the AWA with Sergeant Slaughter and Georgia Championship Wrestling with Paul Orndorff. I mean, all the way through right up to Scott Hall, like we were saying, even though he never worked with Flair, the great team with the Enforcers and Arn Anderson. I mean, is there anybody that ever teamed with Arn Anderson that didn't wind up breaking somebody's arm? He talked about breaking Wyndham's arm. I mean, it seemed like the guy was breaking limbs left and right, whether he was a horseman, whether he was straight up enforcer, whether he was a member of the Dangerous Alliance. I mean, Anderson, if you were with him, you were breaking some type of bone at some point. And what a great team they were. I thought it was real cool how, speaking of that Dangerous Alliance time, talked about how Paulie Dangerously was Paul Heyman, how a lot of the fans know him today, and how he became the face of ECW, the owner of that company. But he said he thought of Paulie. I wasn't sure where he would go with that, given some of the opinions we'll get to in a minute of some of the people that came about in his career later on in that era where Paulie was running ECW. He said Paul Heyman was a great old school guy. He remembered him pushing his way through the cow with a camera at 13 up at Madison Square Garden, and knew the business and was a great mind. Talked about Steve Austin there. I thought it was funny, Steve, something that I dropped in there for your benefit maybe, but he said, Austin was the first guy that could say ass on TV, so he kept saying ass. A couple other things come to mind when a couple other guys maybe in lofty positions or owner-type positions that on the microphone have never been afraid to drop the damn ass, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh, I certainly do, Scum, and it's pretty funny stuff when you think about it, going back and seeing how, generations after generation. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of similarities between the world of professional wrestling from the glory days and what happened backstage to a college fraternity. And that's the fact that every couple of years or so you get some turnover, and the older guys should show some responsibility to help the younger guys. So I can understand that coming from a perspective from being in school and being in a fraternity and being a new guy and, getting razzed and whatever whatever comes with that, to being one of the older guys and helping the younger guys along the way. I can understand the linear comparison there of certainly two different apples and oranges when it comes to actually what was going on, certainly. But I do understand that, taking the time to get the next generation of guys coming along. And, it was later than anticipated with his own son now trying to get into the world of professional wrestling. And Larry, being the nice guy that he is, decided that he's going to help him out along the way. And it seems like he's not so planted somewhere where he has to be a trainer or something along those lines, but more of just an advisor or a liaison to some of the younger guys. So I found that interesting. I found, and I'm looking through my notes here as to what else he was talking about. So many different things with Larry Zbyszko on WGD Weekly with Steve The Scum. We had him for 2 hours. This may be the longest interview yet, but you know, Scum, as I find it here, the one thing that eludes me, my golden goose, I still haven't found out who tore up that title belt.
Yeah. Again, you know what, Steve? I was thinking back, and I was trying to think about that, and I think there's a Zbyszko reference with the title belt. Now that come to think of it, and like I said when we had brought it up in previous shows, you know, I remembered reading about it in an old Pro Wrestling Illustrated, which, by the way, if you haven't yet, check out our PWI 500 special with senior writer Dan Murphy. Fantastic show, great guy, had a lot of fun reliving the days of those old mags, kind of being a kid again there. But you know, I think I remember now they say, maybe when I was thinking of with the Zbyszko destroys the national title, maybe that was a headline speaking about him buying the title. Because I don't ever remember seeing that footage, and I know I said that when we talked about it before. So maybe it was someone entirely different that destroyed the title. Maybe it wasn't Georgia. Maybe, I think originally you thought it might have been the AWA. I don't remember. I recall that you talked about, but I do remember the name Zbyszko, but it very easily could have been in my youth. I mean, how old would I have been then? 8? So, I mean, flipping through one of those magazines, and maybe the article read Larry Zbyszko destroys the national title, meaning when he purchased it, it devalued it. Again, because I don't recall ever seeing that video footage, and I've looked for it since we've talked about it on YouTube, and I cannot find anything on Larry Zbyszko destroying the title. So again, maybe it happens, you know, but maybe we had somebody else in mind there.
Well, you know, Scum, that's interesting that you say that. I do, however, I don't disagree with you, but my memory serves me a little bit differently. I'll say that I do remember the video. And I remembered it was a live event in some capacity. It wasn't in the studio. So, like, you know, that'll rule out the studio portion of AWA wrestling. It'll rule out the backdrop of Georgia Championship Wrestling. It wasn't in a setting like that. It was in a live setting in an arena with a ring behind him above his, would be facing the camera, so it would be above his right shoulder. And the announcer would be standing on your right on the TV screen. And I think it was solely. And I could be wrong. The other thing, though, I did a little bit more research, just like you did, Scum, and on YouTube's not much help, but I just hit the internet, and I found another story that kind of consecutively went along with it, and my memory is so bad, like you said, because 7, 8, 9 years old, Superstar Billy Graham had an angle where he destroyed a title belt that was related to, I believe, Bob Backlund, as I'm thinking about it. So, again, now, I think it's just that we're old, Scum.
Yeah,
you can't quite remember.
Right. You know, maybe a little short-term memory, or long-term, in this case, memory loss. Not really sure how that happens, but, you know, possibly did. Anyway, either way, title belts have been destroyed. Maybe it wasn't Larry. Maybe it wasn't that. You'll have to bear with us. Steve and the Scum are human here, folks. So, you know, if it wasn't, Larry didn't remember it, we can't actually recollect, but you can trust me when I said there's been a few title belts that have been destroyed. My man Steve recalls some footage of somebody back in that day, and again, I seem to remember the same story. I don't recall seeing it, but again, I'll take Larry's word for it and chalk it up to bad memory. Maybe it was Superstar Graham. That would be in the same era there. So anyway, to get back on track here with Larry, would it be safe to say that he does not share, in my opinion, with having sympathy for Vince Russo?
I'll be honest with you. I'm going to have to agree with you there, Scum. I don't think he's a Vince fan.
Yeah, you know, we've had a few people on that kind of, you know, had a different take on that. A couple people that, you know, everybody seems to have opinion on working with him. You know, I think in some cases, like I've said before, I think he was unfairly criticized. Given the passion that Larry was talking about it, absolutely no way that I'm stepping in the middle of that and saying anything about it. I mean, hey, he was a legend in the business. He was taken off Nitro. He was taken off Thunder for whatever reason. He said Bobby Heenan was as well. Again, I don't know that had anything to do with Russo. I was not there. If Larry Zbyszko chalks up some of those moves and has his feelings about that, I'm sure they're somewhat warranted and or very warranted. So again, I wasn't going to step in there. You know, you're talking somebody with 40 years of experience in the wrestling business, whereas myself, 0. So you know, if Larry wants to get it out there, Larry can get it out there. And again, just safe to say that Larry Zbyszko, not a Vince Russo guy, let's say.
Yeah, I got to agree with you there. Folks, if you don't agree with the Scum or Larry Zbyszko, weigh in your opinion. What do you think of Vince Russo? What do you think of the death of WCW? What do you think of Larry Zbyszko, the living legend himself? Tune in WGD Weekly on Facebook. Leave us your opinions. If you're a tweeter, hop on Twitter. Go to @SButera33, @SBUTERA33. Leave us your opinions. Give us a follow. Subscribe to our channel. We always bring you the best in classic pro wrestling. We're not going to give you all of our opinions and tell you what's going to go on next week. That's none of our business. You know, we are a fan just like you. We spent a lot of time on this podcast, and we spent a lot of time making sure that we bring you the best quality when it comes to what we ask our performers, what we ask our guests. We want to make sure that we cover some of the old topics that you like. And we try to sneak some names in there along the way that certainly for myself and the Scum are certainly enjoyable, guys that we love. I know we talked about Bill Eadie in Pittsburgh, one of my all-time favorite guys. We talked about Vince Russo, another guy that's high up on our list of guys that have been in the wrestling business. So, Scum, with that said, I think we're going to head on down the line here, man. It's been a couple hours worth of enjoyment with Larry Zbyszko tonight. I think when I see him again, I hope he doesn't cuff me in the back of the head for it, but I think I'm going to call him Uncle Larry because I felt like I was sitting there listening to one of my uncles tell some great stories.
Sure. Or hopefully he doesn't put you in that front face lack sleeper that he developed there that he would choke people out with. I probably would wind up me getting that anyway. I'm usually the one that takes the brunt of the whoopings around here. But anyway, Steve, one more thing I wanted to touch on before we went, and that was you had spoken about Larry's son giving it a go and really being excited and Larry getting behind him. Just wanted, before we got off the air, just an idea. You know me, I always got my creative juices a-flowing here. Any chance that he forgoes the Zbyszko name and due to something that we kept hearing throughout the night, he adopts the last name Skywalker and is accompanied by Larry Juan Kenobi when he comes out? Maybe they break out the old robes and a couple of lightsabers?
Oh, boy. For the humor sense, that would be nice to see, but for longevity, don't know if that's going to go over for too long, but absolutely be funny to watch anyway. I thought you were going to say something about yourself there, Scott, to be quite frank with you.
Well, I mean, I got an obvious opponent that they could feud with. You could get Larry Skywalker or whatever first name this youngster adopted, and he could feud with another one of our favorites, Vader.
I thought for sure you were going to say Darth Scum. I guess I don't know you that well, man.
Hey, I know you. There ain't many people that get more excited when all of a sudden the curtain drops and you aren't expecting it, and here comes Vader. That'll
never get old. Never get any time, especially when you're dealing with an event where you don't quite know who's next. Similar to the Royal Rumble. At any point in time, I'm waiting for Vader to part the curtains.
Absolutely. We're going to have to see what we can do about getting the big mastodon on the program here. Maybe we can arrange that to have Larry Juan Kenobi and Vader in some type of a saber battle.
Yeesh. Maybe pay-per-view. Who knows?
All right. You get Lucasfilms on the line.
Yeah. That crazy son of a bitch sold all his stuff to Disney. George Lucas, he's retired.
Yeah. Well, again, the Jedi Master Larry Zbyszko with us tonight on WGD Weekly. Always a pleasure to do business with you, Steve, and certainly thank you so much to Larry Zbyszko for coming on the show tonight, spending a good, 90-plus minutes with us, reliving all those classic memories. It doesn't get any better than that. And, well, next week, I don't know that it'll be better, but I think that it'll give a run for his money when we got the total package. Lex Luger is with us next week, Steve. The hits just keep coming in, it seems like, here on WGD Weekly. We talk irons in the fire. Again, you know what I'm getting at when I say this. They're heating up. They're red hot. They're white hot. I mean, there is a list that you would not believe, a who's who that we got booked, we got confirmed. We're talking from now until, there's no end in sight as to the list that we got coming forward. We got the big event November 30th in Winston-Salem at the Benton Convention Center, WrestleCade. Myself, the Scum, Steve and the Scum will be there for WGD Weekly. We'll be sitting front and center. Happy to greet all our listeners with former ECW champion Justin Credible will be there with us. Come on out, say hello to Justin. Unbelievable lineup there. We're real excited to meet some of the fans, meet some of our listeners. And I'm sure Justin will be there scratching his name out, signing some autographs. I'm sure he'll have some cool stuff, for you to check out. So that's about all I got, Steve. Anything else out of you, my man?
Not really. I just wanted to reiterate a couple of things for our listeners that, with Scum, you mentioned next week our special guest is Lex Luger. If you haven't tuned in already, just this past Thursday we put up our special PWI 500 episode with senior editor of PWI, Dan Murphy. That's maybe our most unique interview maybe that we've ever done, simply because of the content matter. It was a special edition. We didn't want to put that into our weekly schedule because we have so many other great guests coming up. Like we mentioned, Lex Luger. We got people the week after that, and all the way down the line, folks, probably all the way to the end of the year. So tune in to WGD Weekly. If you guys are in that North Carolina area, the Southern Virginia area, South Carolina, I know that area like the back of my hand. I know what kind of a drive it is. It's not that far. Hop in the car on Saturday morning, November 30th, fill it up with gas, get to the Benton Convention Center in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Bring a couple of $20 bills with you and get as many autographs as you possibly can. It is chock full of legends. I cannot wait. I'm making a beeline for Bill Eadie. I'm finding Greg Valentine. I'm finding Tully Blanchard. I'm finding Magnum TA. Then I'm going to park my ass down and help out Justin Credible along with you, Scum, all day long. We got so many things going on, so many irons in the fire. You don't want to miss it, guys. Hit the subscribe button so we can remind you. You don't have to look us up anymore. We'll tell you about everything that's going on. And keep in mind, every Sunday, our podcast will give you the best content in classic professional wrestling. We will give you the best guests we could possibly muster, and we'll keep that into the guys of classic professional wrestling. Probably won't get any modern guys here. We're going to get guys that you can remember from the glory days of professional wrestling. Tune in, WGD Weekly with Steve the Scum. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, WGD Weekly. And as always, for the best classic wrestling content on the internet, tune in to WGD Weekly with Steve the Scum. Follow Facebook.com/Wrestling's Glory Days. Myself, the Scum, we're staffers there. We got another dozen guys on the staff. We post about every hour on the day, and there's always something there for you. Thanks so much for listening. We're going to tune out right now. We're going to head down the line, and we really thank you for joining us. Thanks so much. Once again, I'm Steve. On behalf of the Scum, we're out.
Have a good week, people.